1. This happened to me some time ago, back when I was 10, on a school field trip to a group of cabins some 70 kilometers or so from the city I lived in. The point of the trip was basically to just have fun. We weren't being taught much other than how to make shelters and light a fire in the rain. For the most part, we were supposed to spend the majority of time just fooling around, playing tag and swimming in the nearby lake, and maybe playing board games inside the cabins when it was pouring outside. Things turned out to be less fun, at least during the first 2 days. At first, the trip seemed great. We got to choose our own roommates. There were 4 rooms in each of the 4 cabins, and my group of friends and I obviously chose one together. There were 4 of us in total, myself, an Indian guy, a Canadian, this happened in Canada, and a Chinese guy. Neither of us had ever been on a trip like this before, so far from home and in the middle of a mountainous forest. When we got there, we took a tour, which was led by the camp's coordinator, this 20-something-year-old with shoulder-length blonde hair. He showed us the cabins, the lake, the trails, and kitchens and lunchrooms, and then stressed to us that it was important that we not wander far from the cabins, since being in a forest at the base of a mountain, the chances of getting lost were relatively high. So we finished the tour, ate dinner, and then were guided to bed, as we had arrived somewhat late. My friends and I were extremely excited, what with this being our first time sleeping away from home and everything. The Canadian friend had the, at the time, seemingly brilliant idea to share ghost stories while we got ready for bed. Each time we come up with a fictional character that would creep out kids or murder people or something. I came up with this idea of someone called Psycho, who would hide behind the shower curtains and then stab you when you stepped inside. For the record, no one showered during the 4 days we were there. The Indian guy came up with the typical under-the-bed monster, who would grab your legs as you got close to the bed frame and drag you under. As the hour passed, and the lights out drew closer, we started to get the creeps. By the time lights out hit, 2 hours later, we were so high-strung with a combination of excitement and nerves that everyone, excluding me, decided to share one bed, even though there were 2 of them. The Indian guy's story about the grabbing your ankles and being dragged under the bed monster unnerved us to the point that we jumped onto the beds from nearby pieces of furniture, rather than have to walk near the bottoms. As I mentioned previously, I decided to sleep on my own because 3 people in one bed, even 10-year-olds, was awkward, and this being summer, it was hot. We talked for a bit before turning off the lights and falling asleep, but I was woken some hours later by what sounded like whispering. I didn't move at first, since the stories we had shared while getting ready for bed were still in my mind, and then I recognized the voices, and realized my friends were the ones whispering, from over on the other side of the room in their bed. So I relaxed for a moment, and I was about to call out and ask what they were discussing, when the Indian guy, apparently unaware that I had woken up, hissed, "What's it doing?" Immediately, the thought of some monster looming over my bed took to my mind, and I froze, eyes darting around in the darkness. I didn't see anything, as the room was empty and it was too dark to make out the distinctive forms of my friends in the other bed. "He's looking at him," said the Chinese guy, and then added, "Do you think it'll break the window?" And then I looked at the window. It was one of those floor-to-ceiling ones with a latch that opened up to a balcony. Sitting in the balcony, pressed up against the curtains, was the silhouette of a person. The curtains were drawn, but they were white and thin, and we could still see the warped shadow of the person, illuminated from behind by the dim light of the moon. The man, it was almost certainly a man, was holding a long pole with a wide end, similar to a sledgehammer, or even an axe. I whispered, "Guys!" The man outside didn't move, but the Chinese guy did. I don't know how he even worked up the courage to do this, but he crawled out of bed and slowly worked his way to the side of the window, ducked low all commando style. He reached forwards, grabbing the curtains, and was about to peek between the fabric when the man outside knocked on the glass. The poor Chinese guy jumped so badly that he pulled hard on the curtain, causing the entire thing to rip off the railing, letting us see the person outside. He was dressed in black, aside from a pair of orange shorts, and had a ski mask on. What he held in his hands was actually a shovel, rather than a hammer or axe. Nevertheless, the four of us were terrified. The Chinese guy screamed and bolted for the door, and in less than a second, the four of us were scrambling out of bed and hightailing it for the exit, screaming all the while. The Indian guy tripped along the way, and the Chinese guy was in such a rush that he slammed into the door, causing the lock to nearly snap. In seconds, we were in the cabin's lobby, and everyone else was rushing out of their rooms to see what happened. Teacher included, she had her own room. We told the teacher in terrified gasps what had happened, and she went to investigate, but found nothing. The person had disappeared. After that, it took about an hour before we were convinced to even step back into our room. I clambered into bed with my friends, despite their protests, and we stayed awake for the remaining 4 hours or so, hands clutched around our flashlights. The curtains remained open. The next day passed normally, and though we talked about the event, we soon forgot ourselves in the blur of activities that the summer camp counselors set for us. We ate lunch, fooled around, ate dinner, and then, with no small amount of dread, walked back to the cabins and got ready for bed. The same guy came back, but to a different cabin this time. When we woke up and headed for the breakfast hall, a group of girls were talking about the man with the shovel, and after talking with them for a bit, we realized that they had experienced the same thing as us. We were just about to go to the teacher and explain that there was someone out there trying to murder us little kids, when the camp's coordinator, the 20-something with blonde hair, walked into the breakfast hall wearing the exact same orange shorts the man outside our balcony had been wearing. He denied everything when our group questioned him, and we didn't dare take the matter to the other camp counselors or even our teachers. The rest of the trip was uneventful, but judging by the shorts, it was almost definitely him. At the time, it freaked me out to think that one of the camp's counselors was doing that sort of thing. We suspected him for murder and a whole host of other things. But looking back at the trip, he was probably just a bored young adult, trying to make an otherwise repetitive job as a counselor more exciting. Still, I hate to think how depraved he must have been to scare 10-year-olds in that way, possibly leaving them with trauma or emotional scarring. We avoided him like the plague for the duration of that trip. Edit. Points of clarification. I don't know why he would have a shovel. We might not have seen him properly. Really, it was just a quick glance between the curtain breaking down and us running out of the room. It could have been something else, though the general agreement was that it was a shovel. And it's entirely possible that it wasn't the counselor. Yeah, he was literally the only person who wore orange clothing. Never mind something as specific as shorts. Also, this was out in the middle of nowhere, quite literally. The only refuge and food and water in any direction, for about 10 kilometers, was in the cabins. So I doubt it was someone from outside the camp. 2. This story occurred about 4 years ago when I was still in college. I had just moved into an apartment with my then girlfriend, now fiancée, Elise. I worked part-time while I focused on school, and she worked full-time to support us. She worked in an office about 40 minutes away from our apartment, so I usually expected her home 40 minutes to an hour after I knew she had gotten off of work. For some necessary context, we were vocal atheists back then. We're still unbelievers, but we keep it to ourselves these days. I was in a bit of an edgy college student phase, so I felt like everybody needed to know my opinions on the existence of deities. My zeal bled into Elise, though less vocal than I, approved a bumper sticker for our shared car. It was nothing offensive or rude, just funny. It was the word Darwin spelled out in the shape of the Jesus fish. Sure, it poked a little fun, but I never felt it was unnecessarily provocative. Anyway, one day in particular, I had finished up with school and work for the day, and was planning on meeting Elise at the grocery store to pick up some things on her way home from work. I was waiting for her to call to let me know when she was close, so we could arrive at the same time. Right on time, Elise called me. But the content of the conversation was a surprise. She said that on her way home, a man had pulled up next to her at the red light and began berating her for that bumper sticker. "What's your problem? Do you hate God?" he said. She rolled her window up and ignored him. She'd figured he had said his piece and would move on. But no. He continued to follow her, graduating from prodding her about her theological beliefs, or lack thereof, to insulting her looks and intelligence. "You little slut. Is that how you justify taking every dick that comes near you? God isn't watching, so why not? Fuck you. Too stupid to surrender to Christ. Dumb fucking slut. You don't know anything. I'll teach you the Bible, that's for sure." At this point, she got scared. He'd been following her for over 3 miles now, and she was getting close to the grocery store. In the midst of all this, she had forgotten to call me to let me know to head to the store to meet her. When she did call, she was almost in tears. She explained the situation, and that she was about to pull into the store and was worried he'd follow her in. I jumped up and got in my beater, speeding to the store. When I got there, she was parked in the lot, with a large mid-50s man standing next to the driver door, finger pressed against the glass, demanding her to let him in so he could take part in her hedonism. "If you're fucking every dick you come near, why not me?" he yelled at her. "Come on, you little slut. You know you want it." He started banging on the window. I didn't even turn my car off before running out of it and toward her car. She was sitting in her locked car, sobbing in fear, when I grabbed the guy's shoulder, spun him around, and asked him what the fuck his problem was. He gave me a shove on the shoulder and told me to mind my business. I'm not big or scary, but I did grow up with an older brother who is significantly bigger than me, plus I went to public schools in a not-so-great area, so I'm relatively proficient at defending myself. I told him she was my business, and that if he didn't back the fuck off and go home, his day was going to get very bad. I was inches away from his face at this point, finger planted in his chest. I was terrified. Angry as I was, I had no idea if I could take this guy. He looked like a Vietnam vet based on his tattoos, and he had a pretty stable build. He was by no means a powerless geriatric old man. Eventually, I threatened to call the cops on him, and that seemed to ward him off. He walked towards his car, still screaming about what a slutty bitch my girl was, and that I should keep my bitch on a leash, which I'm pretty sure is a line stolen from the 40-year-old virgin. We waited for his car to leave the parking lot, and I got in the car with Elise to calm her down and let her know nothing would happen to her while I was around. We did our shopping and moved on. Since we took separate cars, that meant we had to drive home separately. I drove behind Elise to make sure she wasn't being tailed. As we were about to turn into the entrance of our apartment complex, I see his shitty van a few cars behind me. Fuck, I think to myself. I call Elise and tell her to circle the block until I tell her otherwise and she agrees. I decided that if he followed me into our complex, I'd call the cops. Well, he did just that. I pulled into an area far from our building so he couldn't know which was ours. I pulled into a parking space, dialed 911, explained the situation, and stupidly got out of the car to confront him. The combination of vile things he said to such a sweet and wholesome girl, plus his persistence in pursuing us, had made me ready to hurt him. Only this time he wouldn't get out of the car. In a weird, twisted role reversal, he was locking himself in his car, and I was outside screaming at him. He gestured towards his phone, which showed a phone call screen and the phone number 911. I was so confused, but relieved that they were coming, even though I'd already called them. After this, I sat in my car and waited. When the cops arrived, they asked that I call Elise and have her meet us so she could give her side of the story. We all said our piece, and when the cops looked up this old fucker's information, they immediately placed him in handcuffs. He was known for harassing school-aged girls, and had done time years before for raping his ex-wife. As the police were taking him away, he began screaming hysterically. He kept repeating the same phrase over and over. "You can't do this. I'm the fucking cross, man. God gave me the cross. I hold the cross." It was so bizarre, manic almost. Once they took him away, they let us know that he called them to report our bumper sticker. He thought it was illegal to espouse atheist or otherwise non-Christian ideas in public. That got a laugh from me. We never heard anything more about him, and I'm not mad about it. Crossman, let's not meet again, you fucking creep. 3. So this was winter 2007 or 2008 in mid-Missouri. I don't remember what the month was, but there was just a little snow on the ground behind the bushes I ended up hiding in, so it was definitely winterish. It was pitch black outside, so it was probably a new moon. Maybe someone can chart that. I lived with my mom and dad in a 3-story house at the time. The first story, or 0 story as my dad called it, being a finished basement that I essentially lived in and almost never emerged from except to sleep in my room on the 3rd floor. I was always either in the basement or on the 3rd floor. And putting it lightly, I'm really glad I wasn't on the 3rd floor when this story went down. My dad was out of town on some kind of business trip. He's a doctor, so I'm honestly not sure what kind of trip it could have been. It's hazy, but that doesn't matter. The main thing is my mom and I were alone in the house, which was extremely rare. I was also a teenager and thus a smartass, so I convinced her to watch was, at that time, my favorite movie. My favorite movie was Saw 3. And my mom, God bless her, is a tiny, often timid woman. Though very strong and powerful when it counts, I'm not knocking her. So I knew we'd probably start watching in good sport, but abort the mission before long and make me turn it off. Still, I thought it'd be fun or funny or something. I was a dumb kiddo. Y'all know how it is. So of course I want to watch the movie in the basement instead of the living room. Not just because it was my habitat, but as I told her, a good horror movie deserves a basement. Again, I was a dumb kiddo. Or maybe not so dumb in this case. The only way into our basement was behind a pretty hefty door, just off a hall from the living room on the 1st floor. Basically, if you walked into the house, you normally wouldn't notice there was a basement door at all, because it was off to one side. I say normally, because in this case there were a lot of saw noises coming from that door. So my mom is performing admirably. Really above and beyond the call of duty. Because we're in the middle of the scene where Carrie is strung up and has to dig for a key in a vat of acid. I'm feeling so proud that my mom is staying still for this, but in retrospect, thank Christ she didn't give up and run off. Maybe she was about to, I don't know. But she stayed, until it became time for us to leave. Right when Carrie started fishing in the tank of acid, keep in mind this is a very loud movie, screaming and all that, I think I hear the door upstairs slam. I think, nah, that's ridiculous. But a half a second later I realize there are footsteps above us. And my dad is in another state. Somehow I don't panic, but I probably waited a little too long trying to listen. At the time I thought I heard 3 people, but footsteps are hard to judge. They just kind of marched around from what I heard. But what I heard was very short, because as soon as I realized what was going on, I told my mom we had to get out. The basement had a back door, with lighting on the outside wall, unfortunately. I was concerned about the lights when we were leaving. I remember being worried whoever was upstairs might be able to see us when we ran out. But I decided not to turn the light off, thinking it'd be more obvious if that side of the house went dark when we ran out, than it'd be if we just scampered with the light on. It was around 11 p.m, I think. So total dark except for the lights in the basement and on the back wall of the house. The house next to us was empty, for sale, and the house on the opposite side couldn't have seen anything because it was up on a hill. Point being, I got my mom and convinced her to run out into the dark and hide behind some bushes, but there was no one around to help us immediately. I called 911 the second we got behind the bushes alongside the house. But I remember I went silent on the operator right before I could give her our address, and she was saying something repeatedly while I had the phone down trying to pretend I wasn't there. I noticed the light around the basement exit get brighter, like someone had opened the door. Because someone had opened the door. And to the best of my ability I counted 4 shadows absolutely tear out of the basement at top speed into the woods behind our house. As I told the cops when they got there, very rapidly and in full force, kudos to our town's police. I thought I saw 4, but they rushed out so fast, there could have been 1 or 2 more, or maybe 1 less. This has been a very long story, so I'll get to the too long didn't read bullet points of what happened or might have happened that night. The front door lock was all jacked up, like it had been pried somehow. Because it absolutely had been pried, I always locked that door even when my dad was actually home. So that was point 1. Point 2, while the front door had been closed after they came in, the back door of the basement had been left wide open, and our 2 dogs and cats were outside when the cops got there. They were all inside pets who never got outside, so the second I saw my dog run up to me I knew I hadn't been imagining things. Point 3, and this is where I have to start filling in some blanks because I don't know everything. These people, 3 or 4 or however many, broke in through our front door. I heard them and managed to get the hell out while they stomped around upstairs. Point 4, I am in the bushes with my mom maybe a minute later, and I see shadows race out the back basement door into the woods. I count 4, but I'm scared, so I can't be sure. Point 5, nothing in the house was misplaced or stolen, or vaguely disturbed, even though there were expensive electronics in both the living room they entered into and the basement they ended up in. Point 6, and this is the important one, which the police, as much as I respected them, didn't seem to understand and thought I was being hysterical about. These people broke in the front door. We blitzed out the back door. But as I said, the stairs to the basement were not all that obvious. More to the point, if they were burglars, why would they care to find the basement when there was so much to loot in the living room? In my estimation, they sought out the basement more than they sought out anything to steal. There's no explanation for how it all went down, and how fast it all went down, other than this. Putting all those points together, a group of people broke through my front door, stomped around a little, paused to listen for the sound of people, heard the noisy movie with screams downstairs, followed the sound to the door downstairs in search of the residents, surged downstairs really fast, surveyed the big basement room and saw a horror movie playing with no one around, and then surged out the back door. So what were they looking for? Burglars don't go looking for people, they avoid them. So what happened at my house that night? The cops never searched the woods behind our house, but they did put a cruiser in front of our house for 2 nights, which was nice of them. The morning after it happened, not having slept, I decided I wanted to watch The Strangers as some way of coping. I was a weird kid. Anyway, freaky people, thrill seekers, I'm not sure what to call you. I've been dancing around this because I've never admitted this fact out loud, or in specific words online. But I think you probably came to my house that night with physically violent goals. You zeroed in on the sound of humans, and when you found none of us around, you left because you'd lost what you came for. I only had a few seconds to act. I try not to wonder what you would have done if you'd found my mom and me in that basement, but it comes up time to time in my mind. So possible thrill seekers, whatever your thrills may have been, I've seen so many people here say this, but never thought I had a good reason to say it myself until now. Let's seriously not meet. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 294. Thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. I was thinking about story 3 there. I think what likely happened in that situation is they had come across what they thought was an unoccupied house, broke in with the intention of robbing the place, and when they eventually heard the sounds coming from the basement, realized, oh shit, we made a lot of noise breaking into this place. we're obviously going to have to do something about that because clearly those people heard us. So that's when they accessed the basement with the intention of either restraining them or doing something a bit more permanent. I guess we'll never really know. And they saw that the occupants had in fact fled. They realized, well, we'd better get out of Dodge because the police are clearly on their way. Okay, and with those thoughts, I think I'm going to head off for now. So, until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourself.